That night, Frankie sat in her tiny apartment, lit up like daytime, staring at nothing. Her mind, as it tended to do so often anymore, wandered over to the day's events in disbelief. The Ingrams. Case closed. However confused she was, she had hope that wherever they were at rest now. She didn't know how much more of this she could take. Was she mad? Even though it all added up, she still had to wonder, was she going to end up the way Redamona had? Secluding herself away and hiding from the world? She watched as a shadow twisted and clawed its way across the far wall of her apartment, and however impossible it was for that to happen, she didn't even flinch. Let them come, she thought. She still didn't fully understand what the dark truly was, and she needed to. She needed to understand why she was able to see the things she saw, things no one else could see. These black, twisted things that came from dark places and tormented her constantly. One day she would know. She was determined. The ghost she saw, however, that was something different. Was it the shadows showing her these things? Was it simply another torment? She wasn't sure of anything anymore. It seemed like the only dead she wasn't seeing were the ones she wanted to see. Spokane, Washington, 11 years earlier. Closed casket. She kept hearing the term throughout the funeral home. At 17, she knew what the term meant, but that didn't mean she wanted to be reminded. The funeral itself was over, but the mass of people, some of whom she did not even recognize, still crowded the morose room as though it were a social gathering. Some means to catch up on old times. She sat in a folding chair in the front row, staring at the casket. It was as though she were willing it to go away, willing it all to go back the way it was. Back to when everything, though never okay, was always okay. Her father stood in a far corner of the room talking to a minister. His eyes, red and swollen, seemed like glass, peering out from two tired hollows. Dane stood quietly beside him, his hands folded and his eyes just as red and glassy as their father's. She didn't know anymore how to react. She felt a sense of betrayal, mixed with shock, anger, and deep, heart-tearing despair. Her mother had been walking that night, as she did every night. But on this night, their neighbor had been drinking. It was raining and the curve was dark. He shouldn't have been driving, but he was. He took the corner too fast and lost control of his Jeep, hitting her mother, trapping her beneath the vehicle, and dragging her half a mile before overturning and tumbling another 40 feet, taking her along with it before finally throwing her into a tree. The medical examiner said that she hadn't felt anything. After the initial impact, she died immediately, but Frankie could see the lie clearly in his eyes. Somehow she just knew. Her mother felt all of it. She remembered a story her grandfather had told her once about a pair of lovebirds he watched for several years in the woods near her grandparents' home just 50 miles away in Newport. He had told her the birds were so much in love that they depended on one another for flight. Their bond was so strong that one bird became the other's wings. One day, the female bird died. Her mate, so distraught and heartbroken, took flight as high up as he could go into the sky, and then plummeted back down to the ground without spreading his wings, dying unimpacted. His love for his mate was so immense that he refused to live without her. He would say that's how much her father loved her mother. At the time, it was both a sad and romantic story. The two beings could be so much in love that the very thought of life without another was simply unbearable. It was only a week before she noticed that her father had stopped eating. His eyes looked black and sunken in, desolate and hollow, with an emptiness that one might find on the face of a puppet someone had tossed into a corner. That's what he reminded her of. He had no energy and simply refused to leave the couch. He would just sit there. He didn't speak, he didn't sleep, he didn't eat. His features grew blank and gray, the ashen color climbing from his limbs all the way to his deeply receding hairline, and no matter how she and Dane pleaded with him to eat, it was as though they were not even there. Several weeks later, she and Dane were attending their father's funeral as well. They didn't have to say anything to one another. However unspoken, they each knew that the other had accepted deep down that their father died the same night their mother had. His body just took time to follow suit. Indeed, the only dead she didn't see were the ones she truly wanted to. The shadow scurrying along her wall grabbed once more at her attention, forcing her to focus on it. She could see it as it tried to take a shape in the blinding brightness of her small abode. Was it really there? How could it be? There was no room for a single shadow in this place. She even suffered through the uncomfortable heat that all of the light created in such a small space, but still, there it was. Just a small piece of blackness there on the wall, trying desperately to fight against the light and make itself whole. The curve was dark, she thought.